There's always been something incredibly cozy to me about FMV games. Perhaps it's because they're so cinematic, so sitting down to play one feels more like watching a movie. Or perhaps it's because the crunchy, full-motion videos bring me right back to being a kid, back to an era of VHS tapes and playing these kind of games on the family computer. Given how immersive FMV games tend to be, it's no surprise then that it makes for a perfect match with horror. Chances are you've at least heard of Night Trap, easily the most infamous one of the lot, released in the 90s when FMV gaming was at its peak. But while catching myself up on FMV history, I noticed that it's a genre that's largely dominated by Western developers. At first I assumed that it just never caught on in Japan much, but no, as it turns out there were quite a few Japanese FMV games, they just never got localized usually. One that caught my eye in particular was a little game called The Fear, which released in 2001 on the PS2. It was developed by Digital Frontier, who up until that point mostly worked in computer graphics, and it was published by Enix shortly before they merged to become Square Enix. The Fear was actually the third entry in Enix's so-called Cinematic Active series, a trio of FMV games released across the PS1 and PS2, all developed by different companies. The first was Murder on the Eurasia Express, a murder mystery on the PS1 that was an unexpected hit and is often credited with introducing the FMV genre to Japanese audiences. The second entry was Love Story on the PS2, which was, you guessed it, a love story. And lastly, we have The Fear, a very experimental horror FMV game. The game starts with a pretty lengthy opening cutscene. A camera crew and a small group of actresses are on the road, travelling to their next gig. One of the girls, Yukari, starts to feel unwell, but they chalk it down to car sickness and keep on driving. Yukari is a medium, able to communicate with spirits and ghosts, and their plan is to travel to a creepy, abandoned mansion to see if anything spooky happens overnight. Textbook early 2000s TV show stuff, you know how it goes. As they step inside, Yukari sees scary visions of dead people and monsters before fainting, and you'd think this would be more than enough reason for them to call it quits and go home, but no, in classic horror movie fashion, they ignore all the warning signs and go inside anyway. Everyone splits up to get ready for filming, and we get to try out the gameplay. Unlike most other FMV games, you have full control over your movement here, being able to examine things in the room, approach characters to talk to, and even solve puzzles, all in a first-person perspective through your camera. Movement is slow, but thankfully the entire game takes place within a fairly small and manageable space, so it never really takes that long to get from A to B. Plus, you can always just run if you can get over the somewhat goofy running animation. Even though the house is now populated with actors and a camera crew, the dark, lonely hallways still have a really foreboding, ominous energy. I guess it's the stillness of FMV games that makes you feel like something is gonna jump right out at you, and then the camera filter's the cherry on top, giving it that extra layer of immersion. Mind you, Blair Witch came out just 2 years before this game, and you can really tell they were trying their hand at replicating found footage horror in the video game medium. Outlast came along in 2013 and is probably the most popular example of this, but it's cool to see devs were attempting this as early as 2001. After we stretch our legs for a bit, we go upstairs to check on Yukari in the bedroom before suddenly a ghostly apparition of Yukari appears behind us. She tells us that an evil force in the mansion is suppressing her powers, forcing her body to stay asleep and leaving her no choice but to communicate with us spiritually.
見えたの。むごたらしく人が殺されていく映像。過去のことかもしれないけど、これから起こる未来のことかもしれない。
Our conversation with Yukari is cut short though when we hear a scream come from downstairs. Two of the girls are distraught because they saw the producer, Okuyama, dead outside. We're sent to investigate this, but we don't make it very far.
なんだ。
何？開かない。窓が開かなくなっちゃった。どういうこと？大変です。応接室の窓にシャッターが。
応接室だけじゃない。玄関もだ。何が起きたんですか？
今メイクルームの窓が急に閉まっちゃったんだけど。メイクルームもですか？ Aクルーム持って
まさか
閉じ込められた。
With one person already dead and the rest of the crew trapped, everyone splits up to look for another exit, a key, or any means of survival, as we have now entered the world of survival horror. Exploring in the Fear is rather straightforward. As you explore any given room or area, there are green indicators at the center of the screen telling you what can be examined and what can't. And in classic horror game fashion, keys and other essential items can be quite literally anywhere, so it really pays to be thorough here. Thankfully, the visual indicators make this very easy. Instead of other FMV games where you might end up mindlessly clicking everywhere looking for something you missed, in The Fear you know exactly what is interactive and what's not. So as long as you're patient enough to scour every room from top to bottom, you will not get stuck at any point. In fact, it feels like the game is specifically designed to punish impatient players. For example, throughout the entire game you can randomly find these torn pieces of paper with arrows drawn on them. Finding all three reveals a set of directions, but I had no clue what I needed them for. But then, in the last quarter of the story, I ended up having to crawl through a maze of tunnels, one that leads to instant death if you make one wrong move. Until I realized, oh, maybe this is what the directions are for? And sure enough, when I followed them, I made it through the tunnel first try. Of course, if you just blitz through the game, you'd miss these notes and it would come back to bite you in the ass later. It wants you to take your time and soak everything in, and considering every single interaction has a unique FMV cutscene, I was more than happy to oblige. While The Fear is an FMV adventure at its core, it is clearly a very ambitious one, and I want to talk a little bit more about how they achieved this fully playable first-person FMV game. As you've probably noticed by now, it's not complete free roam movement, obviously. You can only move forward, left and right. It's comparable to a dungeon crawler, or any game really, with grid-based movement. But despite these limitations, this is still a very experimental and unusual use of full motion video. As a genre, FMV adventures are quite old school now. They were at the height of their popularity in the 90s, and because of their age, most games in the genre had extremely limited interactivity, usually taking the form of point and clicks. The Fear, however, came out in 2001 and got to make use of that juicy PS2 technology. And the end result is a full-blown first-person survival horror with entirely FMV environments and visuals. Very unusual. FMV games still exist now, obviously, they're just more of a niche. But even so, over 20 years after The Fear's release, I can't think of many FMV games that have this level of interactivity. It sounds like Digital Frontier's previous experience in the film industry, mixed with a generous budget from Enix, was the perfect storm to allow this kind of game to happen. At a launch event for the game that happened on July 11th, 2001, the actress for Mika said, "The walkthrough scenes when the player is moving around were very difficult to shoot, because we had to sit perfectly still for about 3 minutes, even during the scenes when characters were sleeping." While there sadly isn't any behind-the-scenes footage for the game, after reading a few interviews and articles from back in the day, it sounds like filming went like this. Everyone in the room would stand in position, whether that's sitting, lying down, or doing a particular expression. The cameraman would then capture every possible angle or position that the player would be able to walk to, which could add up to dozens of unique camera angles per room. They would then record any unique dialogue or interactions with the actors face to face, with the actors then making sure to return to the exact same pose as previously recorded during the so-called walkthrough scenes. It's so that their pose stays consistent when it transitions back to exploration. And in the final product, they pulled it off pretty flawlessly. You'd think there'd be more noticeable visual hiccups or inconsistencies, but nah, there aren't really any. Sometimes you can see the character models wiggle very slightly as you move through the room, but I personally find this to be more of an endearing byproduct of very cool game design rather than an imperfection or flaw. But the freedom of walking around in an FMV game wouldn't be much good if there was nothing interesting to look at. Thankfully, the set designers went all out here. There are so many rooms to explore and they are all so carefully decorated. It was always a treat walking into a new area. I'd usually leave the game sit for a few seconds and look at all the cluttered shelves and desktops before actually interacting with any of it. I just wanted to soak in the elaborate set design, you know? Some of the environmental decorations look so obviously fake too, like these toy spiders or the severed hand on the food tray, but the cheesiness just adds so much charm. It really reminded me of the Scooby-Doo movie when they go into the haunted mansion, so maybe that positive association won this game a few brownie points for me, I don't know.
I'm a man of substance. Dorky chicks like you turn me on too.
It can lend to some good scares too. On the second floor there's paintings lining the walls, the creepiest one being right outside Yukari's bedroom. And you go to that bedroom a lot, so sometimes I would walk out of the room, turn left, and then come face to face with this ugly mug. Jesus, this damn painting got me so bad every single time. There's no stinger sound effect, it's really subtle, and yet it makes me feel so uneasy just looking at it. Now, while there are a couple of puzzles in this game, I could probably count all of them on one hand. Aside from the very occasional head-scratcher, game progression mostly involves talking to the TV cast and crew, or finding keys to unlock doors, which usually give you more keys that unlock more doors, rinse and repeat. That might sound kind of tedious, but to give the Fear credit, it never is. Between the immersive gameplay and a genuinely interesting plot, I was pretty hooked from start to finish. The story falls somewhere between cheesy B-movie horror and a murder mystery, with some unexpectedly complicated lore and even religious symbolism. It feels like they wanted to throw every horror trope imaginable into the mix, and you know what? It kinda works. It's very busy and perhaps a bit overambitious, but my god is it entertaining. We'll dive more into the story later, so do look forward to that, but for now, let's dig a little bit deeper into the gameplay. Since Yukari wants us to be her eyes and ears while she's napping upstairs, she gives us the ability to see her visions of the future by pressing the square button. Usually it shows you something that is just about to happen in the story, or a hazy visual of a key item to nudge you in the right direction. It's essentially a hint system, and using it drains your camera's battery, but don't worry, nothing bad happens if it fully depletes. In fact, you can still watch these visions even if the battery is at 0, but they're usually so obscured and blurry that it's impossible to make them out. For some reason, running also depletes the battery, which doesn't really make sense. It feels a bit arbitrary to penalize you just for moving faster, but thankfully it replenishes pretty quickly. Sometimes I just walked back and forth in a hallway a few times to pump it back up to 100. Getting my 10k steps in, keeping fit, you know how it is. But I gotta be honest, I stopped using this hint system pretty quickly, because it has a tendency to outright spoil the story. On 2 separate occasions, it straight up showed me a character who was just about to die, and sure enough, 5 minutes later, they died. Now, I know, it's a schlocky B-movie horror, everyone probably dies, and it's not like I'm massively attached to these characters or anything, but it's not as much fun when you already know it's coming. I enjoy the element of surprise and not knowing who's going to die and when, so it's strange that they designed the hint system of all things to deny you that fun. So yeah, I stopped using it pretty quickly. Trust me when I say you don't need it that much anyway, and it's not worth the risk of potentially getting spoiled. Now, it's worth throwing out there that this video is part of a sub-series on this channel where I specifically cover games that never left Japan. So far we've discussed the PS2 hell simulator Hungry Ghosts and the offbeat rhythm adventure game Planet Dob, so do check out those videos if those sound cool to you, shameless plug, but it's only natural that you might see these games and want to play them for yourself. Language barrier be damned. So how would you manage playing The Fear with no Japanese? Pretty rough, to be honest. Listening to people yap is 80% of what you do in this game, and there's not even any Japanese subtitles to help you out, let alone English. I do think it's worth trying it out just to experience the very unusual gameplay, but with no understanding of the plot or characters, I feel that would lose its luster very quickly. But all hope is not lost. Both Gab Smolders and Iconoclast187 have entire playthroughs of The Fear with English subtitles available to watch on YouTube, so I highly recommend checking these videos out if you want to experience this game regardless. There is indeed a lot of yapping, but who are we yapping to? Let's do a few introductions, starting with the camera crew. We have the producer, who is the one found dead outside at the very beginning, and he is succeeded by the talent manager, Ryoko. The guy rocking the cowboy hat is the very eccentric and quirky director, and then we have the assistant director, or AD for short. There's the sound engineer Tan, Kirina, who is the stylist and makeup artist, and finally Higuchi, who is quite the interesting character on his own. As the Wikipedia page for this game puts it quite bluntly, he has a shaved head, a good build, and speaks like an effeminate gay man. It was the early 2000s, what can he do? He is noticeably more campy and overacts all of his lines, but god, if he isn't the most entertaining character every time he's on screen. There's actually 2 opportunities to talk to Higuchi where he'll quiz you on horror movie trivia.
映画クリスティーンの中で悪魔の魂を持った乗り物は一体何だったでしょう。さあ、しっかり考えよ。
These questions are probably easy as hell if you're a horror movie buff, but personally as someone who doesn't watch movies very often, a few of these had me stumped. Not only because there's a few lesser obvious movies like Brain Dead, for example, but also because a lot of these movies have totally different titles in Japan which are nothing like their Western counterpart. For example, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was called Akuma no Ikenie, or Devil's Sacrifice. American Werewolf in Paris was called Fangulf, and probably the most absurd of all of them, Army of Darkness was called Captain's Supermarket, just because he works in a supermarket, I guess? The theatrical posters in Japan were even changed to be more supermarket themed, and you know what? I think I might prefer them over the original. The final member of the camera crew is, of course, ourselves. We are the cameraman, and like it is our God-given mission, we never let go of that camera, always shoving it in people's faces whenever we talk to them. The cutscenes are even filmed at an angle that prevents you from seeing the cameraman's face. The most we ever get to see is his hair, and that's about it. We don't have a name, or at least no one calls us a name anyway, and all of the other characters instead refer to us as Camera-san, which always made me smile whenever I heard it.
よろしく頼むよ、カメラちゃん。
Now onto the actresses. We've got Eddie, who is the energetic, chatty one, Mayumi, who is shy and always using her instant camera, Natsuki, the religious one, and that's kind of her entire personality, Mika, an extremely driven girl hoping to make it big in the entertainment industry, and of course Yukari herself, who we've already talked about. It may not be obvious, but there is a lot of star power in this cast. All of the girls were popular idols in Japan at the time of release, and their inclusion in this game was a big selling point for it. In fact, they're all playing fictionalized versions of themselves, using their real names for the characters.
7-11いい気分
Not only them, but most of the film crew are extremely established actors in the Japanese film industry, with easily hundreds of TV, film, and stage credits between all of them. The actor who plays the producer, for example, Hatsunori Hasegawa, played the extremely well-known and beloved character Ultraman back in the 80s. Yukari does a load of voice acting in anime and video games to this day, and I was surprised to see she's the Japanese voice for both Terra and Vanille from Final Fantasy. Horror fans might recognize Kirina's actress from the movie Audition, and a minor character who shows up later is played by Mickey Curtis, who is one of the biggest Japanese rock stars ever, with an acting and singing career going as far back as the 50s. They did not cut any corners with the acting talent here, and it shows. Sure, the premise and story is bombastic and cheesy, but the actors commit to it fully, and they all do a damn good job. It's a quality production. While I think all of the characters are quite likeable, the AD and Tan are my personal favourites. Whereas a lot of the other characters are very energetic and lively, these two are just chill as hell. Nothing phases them at all. Someone just died and the AD turns to you and asks you if you want to go for drinks later.
この仕事終わったら一緒に飲みに行きません？朝まで飲みましょう。
Or a whole earthquake happens at one point and all Tan cares about is lighting up his cig. He doesn't give a fuck, it's great. Interacting with these characters will make up the bulk of your playtime, and conversations can vary wildly depending on how you respond. If the other characters ask you a question, you can press circle to agree or X to disagree with what they said. Though, weirdly, there are times when you're given the option to agree or disagree when it doesn't really feel like you were asked a question to begin with.
私とミカさんなら私が死んでミカさんが生き残る。そうでしょ？
do you want me to say yes, or... Sometimes it's just flavor text, giving you little bits of insight into the characters and their thoughts, but other times it can lead to crucial game-altering decisions. For example, Tan will ask you at the beginning whether you want to set up cameras in Yukari's bedroom or the makeup room. You can change this later and you'll see completely different scenes depending on which one you choose. In fact, after multiple playthroughs, I still only managed to see about 60 to 70% of the total cutscenes for each character. So in that sense, there is a lot of replayability if you're someone who likes to hunt down every possible route in these kind of games. And that will be quite the Herculean task, because between all the story cutscenes, one-on-one interactions, and multiple endings, there are an overwhelming number of unique FMVs in this game. I counted over 1,300 scenes total in the cutscene viewer. Absolutely insane. Though I guess I shouldn't be too surprised, considering this is one of the few PS2 games that had a whopping 4 discs. I can barely think of games on that console that had 3 discs, never mind 4. But it certainly makes sense, because the Fear has a lot of story to tell across those 4 discs. So let's have a look at what the story is here. Buckle up, because this is a wild one. As we saw at the very beginning, the producer is seen dead outside and the rest of the crew are locked inside before they have any chance to investigate. While most of the girls are naturally quite scared, getting locked in clearly bothered the cowboy director a lot, because he goes from standing at the door to standing at the door but angry. We check in to see how everyone is doing and quickly notice that Higuchi is sneaking around and acting all suspicious. He's curiously chirpy given the circumstances, and never seems to be present whenever the bad shit goes down. When we go back downstairs, we hear music playing down the hall, and when we go to check, the game asks us to switch to disc 2. Given the fact that there's 4 discs total, you have to swap between them relatively frequently. But one thing I really appreciated was where they put the cutoff point of each disc. It's usually just when a big twist or dramatic moment happens, and I can only imagine people playing this back in the day hurrying to pop the next disc in quickly to find out what happens next. It feels like it's turning a setback of the technology into a strength, turning those few seconds where you're swapping the discs into anticipation building and suspense, like how Resident Evil used door opening animations to hide the PS1 loading screens. Once they get inside, they find the cowboy dead on the wall with a cryptic message written in Russian beside him. Natsuki notices that the deaths they've seen so far remind her of a passage from the Book of Revelations, wherein 7 angels will sound different trumpets, each one unleashing devastating apocalyptic events upon the earth. She speculates that the culprit is trying to replicate this passage from the Bible, possibly as some sort of ritual or sacrifice, and so we're left to wonder not only who the murderer is, but who will be their next victim. Sure enough, people start dropping like flies after this. We find the AD sliced in half in the bathtub, the cowboy's body in the music room suddenly disappears, Kirina, the makeup artist, is found dead in the kitchen, and Natsuki falls into a state of shock, unable to speak and completely spaced out. There's also some kind of octopus monster roaming around too, and while we rarely come face to face with it, it can lead to a nasty insta-kill if you make a wrong turn. Naturally enough, spirits are low and everyone's hope for survival seems to be getting thinner and thinner with every passing minute. All the while, Higuchi is still acting just as suspicious as ever, skulking around, talking in hushed tones with the manager Ryoko, and always running off as soon as we try to question him. As if things couldn't get any more chaotic, the cowboy is suddenly alive again, ambling towards the girls before falling and getting crushed by a chandelier.
死んでます。
そんな、どうしてなの？どうしてってこっちの方が聞きたいわ。この人死んだんじゃなかったの？さっき見た死体は何だったの？涼子さん、何か知ってるんですか？
Ryoko comes clean about everything. The producer and the cowboy's deaths were a hoax from the start, just a setup to scare the girls and make some good TV, while all the camera crew would play along. They didn't have much choice, since the entire thing was the producer's idea. But things quickly went off the rails when people who weren't supposed to die started dying, like the AD, Kirina, and the cowboy. Suddenly, a fake murder mystery turned into a real one, and Ryoko had no clue who was behind it all. We ask her if the producer is still alive, and she says he should be hiding away in the attic.
奥山さん、ひどいじゃないですか。なんとか言ってくださいよ。奥山さん？これは樋口さん。どうして？じゃあ一体。
Would you believe me if I said we're only halfway through this game? We've still got 2 more discs to cover. This game is a roller coaster, man, I swear. Waking up, Higuchi's body is missing, the producer is presumably dead, and if you go back to the cowboy, his body is gone too. We regroup with these two in the library, and they start studying the Book of Revelations to try figure out who the last few victims could be. While they do that, we find a few notes that talk about some disturbing experiments that happened in this mansion many years ago, which involved manipulating frequencies to make people become violent demons. Pretty spooky. Poor Ryoko ends up as unlucky victim number 6, and the tentacle monster scares us away soon after. With only a handful of people left alive, we continue our search for an exit like the brave camera-san that we are, coming across this homeless guy who, after offering us a bite of his chicken, obviously, helps us find the producer, who has been alive this entire time, holed up in the pantry. He locked himself away and played dead in the hopes everyone would either forget about him or get killed off, whichever happens first. Obviously, the producer gets absolutely grilled by everyone, but much like Ryoko said, this was never supposed to happen. Nobody was actually meant to die. They just wanted to fake a few deaths to scare the girls for the camera and be done with it. Even the octopus monster was just the camera crew taking turns wearing a suit. But this still doesn't answer the burning question. People are still dying, so who's the culprit? The biggest suspects, Ryoko and Higuchi, were both killed, and the producer has been locked away for the last few hours, so it couldn't be him. Well, here's another twist for you. It was Tan all along, killing people off to make, in his words, the ultimate horror movie. Taking advantage of the same technology that was used in those experiments all those years ago, he manipulated frequencies to transform Natsuki into a demon. She's been the one doing all the killing this whole time, which is why we found her bloody and dazed after Kirina's death.
やめてくれ、夏希ちゃん。どうした？
私は罪深きもん。
何を言うんだ、夏希ちゃん。
ごめんなさい。許して。
分かってるから。どうしたんだ？
So there you have it. The quiet, chill sound engineer Tan was behind everything the entire time, and he's manipulating frequencies to turn people into demonic killing machines, and then they blow up. Brilliant. We chase down Tan to the basement, where he has Yukari tied to a chair, about to transform her into a demon too. He goes on his great villain monologue, but he doesn't get very far before the homeless man shows up as a monster and wails on him. As he dies, he tells us that it's already too late, and all the girls will transform one by one. Luckily for us, we find a gun that can very conveniently reverse this transformation, and so begins the only combat section in the entire game. We have to find all the girls in the house and save them, but this section is timed, and very strictly so. On a first playthrough, you won't know where they are, and they'll probably blow up before you get there. If you're fast enough though, you get to look at these goofy CGI monster versions of the girls jump around the screen as you battle them. The combat is pretty simple. These rings will zone in on the screen, and you need to press circle exactly as they stop. Blue dodges the girl's attack, and orange counters them with your gun. The timing on this is very strict, and I messed it up a few times before I really got the hang of it. All the while, the girls will move around and hop out of frame to distract you and waste your time. Some of the girls are more challenging than others. They might do multiple attacks before you get a chance to counter them, for example, or Mayumi in the library keeps running around and climbing on the walls, so you have to go looking for her before you get another chance to shoot. Remember that this entire section is timed, so if you waste too much time fighting one girl, the others might blow up before you get there. That's such a funny sentence to read out loud. When they transform back into a human, they each run off to the garage and wait for you, and whether you save all of them or none of them, the game ends with you making your great escape from the mansion in a beautiful CGI car.
It's a show time.
This ending changes depending on who you saved, if you saved anyone at all, and there's different dialogue depending on who's there with you. After that, the credits roll, and I was taken totally off guard by the Ratchet and Clank-ass credits music. Now, that is just a basic run-through of the Fear, but I was pleasantly surprised to find that there's plenty more endings. All of them have fairly obscure requirements, and all of them are very different from each other, so let's talk through each of them. To get this first one, you need to interact only with the actresses and completely ignore the camera crew. When it comes time to go up to the attic and find Higuchi's body at the very end of Disc 2, the room will look quite different. There will be a very ominous altar, and Ryoko shows up wearing a cult robe. She tells us that the killings that happened in this mansion many years ago were not just senseless murders, but in fact a sacrificial ritual to summon some sort of Cthulian entity. That ritual failed, however, because they didn't kill enough people, and now Ryoko wants to try again.
もちろんあなたも感情の内よ
We die, and that's it. Game over. Quite abrupt, I know, but you'll be happy to know that this is only one of 2 Lovecraftian endings in this game, and the other one is honestly way cooler, so let's move on to that one. To explain, there's a puzzle about halfway through the game that involves Mika playing the piano to access a key. No, she does not play the Moonlight Sonata, I'm sorry to say. But if you go to Kirina, the makeup artist, you can ask her to play the piano instead. Worth mentioning that Kirina is quite a minor character overall, and you never really have to interact with her, so this is not what most players would instinctively do. Well, it turns out this small action can completely change the course of the game. Kirina still gets attacked later on, but she doesn't die, managing to hide away in the garage until you find her. Tan is a good guy in this ending, which personally, as a Tan stan, I was very happy to see, but he doesn't last very long and dies 5 minutes later. Aww. Kirina says that Natsuki and the other girls attacked her, calling themselves the Angels of the Apocalypse. At this point, you need to be very careful about the rooms you enter, because the girls will ambush and murder you if you make one wrong move. We run upstairs to find Yukari, but get captured by the girls either way, who start chanting and summoning Cthulhu himself, descending from the heavens in all of his CGI glory. But the ritual is soon interrupted by Kirina, who saves the day.
あんたたち いい加減になさい。
キリナ、なんでお前が。
馬鹿げた茶番劇おしまいよ。
7人の天使の血が流れ、命の火が消えぬ限りあの方は降臨されない。
あんたたちこれが見えないの？
妖精。なぜですか。私はあなたの第一の使徒なのに。
こんなやつのために。大丈夫？キリナさんこそ。こうなったらその穴に飛び込むしかないね。
Both the girls and Cthulhu burn in the mansion flames. Kirina smokes a cigarette in Tan's memory, and Camera-san drops some absolute heat. Pun absolutely intended.
人間には開けてはならない秘密の扉があるということさ。
The funny thing between the last ending and this one is there aren't cult or Lovecraftian implications at any point in this game, so these endings do feel quite random. But I also wasn't expecting the game to have octopus monsters and exploding women, was I? So, you know what, a Cthulhu ending isn't that out of place when all is said and done. Now, we've got 2 more endings and they're quite lighthearted in comparison. This time, interact with absolutely no one. Outside of mandatory cutscenes, of course, do not speak to any of the actresses and camera crew, none of them whatsoever. Then, towards the end of Disc 2, you'll go into the bathroom and the game will very quickly remind you that it came out in 2001 because Mika and Mayumi decide to have a bath together. You know, that thing that women do all the time.
いいお湯。カメラさん、一緒に入ろう。
いやーん、カメラさんのエッチ。
はい、どうも大成功。
いやーん。
Pretty fun. The last ending has to be my personal favourite though, and it's arguably the hardest one to get because you need to get all of the previous endings first to access it. At a very specific moment of Disc 2, if you look at the front door, you'll hear a laugh, and that's how you know you've locked into this ending.
エリちゃん、扉を開けて。
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Angel. Happy birthday to you.
Game over.
They clearly led Eddie to believe it was just a generic birthday ending and not specifically for her birthday, so this was such a sweet moment to capture on camera. If it wasn't obvious enough from my enthusiasm, I have a lot of love for the Fear. More than anything, I was absolutely blown away by how ambitious it was. A 4-disc long FMV game is already such a large-scale project, and then you have the interactive gameplay on top of it. Even if it's a little bit rudimentary by modern standards, it was such a bold and experimental choice that I've not seen many games do before or after it. Many FMV games feel more like you're observing the characters rather than being in on the action, and that's perfectly fine, because being cinematic has always been the goal of the genre. But the Fear takes it a step further. It's cinematic, and you're in the driver's seat, experiencing everything firsthand. If there's any cool FMV games out there with similarly unconventional mechanics, please do drop the names in the comments because I would love to expand my knowledge of this genre. But what I loved even more was the ridiculous story and how it feels like a send-up of the horror genre. Practically every trope imaginable makes an appearance here. Spooky manor, people getting killed off one by one, demons and monsters and very obvious demon makeup, comedically suspicious contraptions all over the house like hidden doors and secret basements. And yet it's not making fun of these tropes, not in the slightest. Rather, it feels like a love letter to these horror tropes of yesteryear, the foundational archetypes that built the horror genre into what it is today. The people who made this game weren't laughing at B-movie horror, they were lovingly recreating it while also celebrating its silliness. People are dying and all the girls decide that's an opportune moment to go to the kitchen and make some tea. Or everyone hears a blood-curdling scream come from downstairs and Mika takes it as an opportunity to practice her acting skills.
私もやってみようかしら。どう？よかった？
This love for the genre is made especially obvious by Higuchi's horror quizzes, a doting celebration of the very movies this game pays homage to. Or the fact the villain is a maniacal filmmaker, killing people so that he can create the ultimate horror movie. It's ridiculous and campy, but it's memorable, and most importantly, it's fun. The Fear is equal parts silly as it is spooky. It laughs at itself as much as it takes itself seriously. And it's a perfect cocktail of why I love horror so much as a genre. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning about The Fear on PS2. This was a really lighthearted and fun video to make, and I really hope that fun came across in the final product. If you enjoy the channel and like what I do, maybe consider supporting me over on Patreon. For just $2 a month, patrons get a bunch of cool goodies like early previews of future videos, behind-the-scenes insight, and also full written reviews of games that I might never get around to covering on the YouTube channel. The latest review I uploaded was a fairly critical discussion of White Day 2, The Flower That Tells Lies, a pretty mediocre sequel to one of my favourite horror games ever. So, if you want a bit of light reading and want to support the channel in the process, consider subbing to me over on Patreon. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.